Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Today is Monday, September 18th. Starting a little late today, as is kind of typical. I don't even know why I bothered to point it out because there is just no consistency anyways, and I'm really just tattling on myself. But yeah, I woke up and thought it was Sunday, I guess. I didn't even really realize it was Monday, so I was definitely just not moving very fast to stream or anything. So yeah, over the weekend I should have scheduled a lot more videos, but then I got ambitious after making one Google Excel sheet, pivot table, and chart to try and see if I could improve my schedule. Other Google sheet that tells me what videos have already been scheduled. Instead of scheduling videos for the future, I messed with a reporting tool to tell me what was scheduled, which is backwards logic certainly. It's much higher priority to have more things scheduled, but I'm in a fairly decent position also with all of that, so this will be the last time we open these special tickets. Which I would look forward to more events in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like this, where you get special packs where there's some kind of focus of any sort whatsoever on new cards, or just trying to change what the meta might be, or trying to change who has the best cards or the newest cards. Honestly, it's more newest cards than even best cards. Just getting something different that feels different and doesn't just feel like here's another expansion for the 10,000 card pool is something I can definitely appreciate. Although, in all fairness, I have no idea if any of these cards really are important or not. And it's kind of impossible to really know because too many events are happening back to back for my speed. So we have this event, which I've gotten past the point of getting this, which is the bare minimum you would want to do. If we can get up to this point, that's great. Everything on top of that is pretty much gravy. At a certain point, maybe it would make sense to jump into even playing ranked instead. But yeah, I definitely feel like I bit off more than I could chew trying to work on my second Excel sheet. There's still just a lot of weirdness around Excel sheets. It is too close to a programming language to not confuse my brain a little bit in the fact that it really isn't a programming language. Excel sheets or Google Sheets are effectively coming from one very narrow perspective, in that you're going to have nicely laid out information that is, for the most part, numerically based to an insane extent that a time is considered just as to be a fraction of a day. So if you say like 12 o'clock noon, that will, in the underlying way it's saved, be 0.5, when a programming language would definitely label it as a time and probably just keep it as text and say 12 o'clock noon, or break it down into perhaps an array that would have hours, minutes, milliseconds, and very possibly even have a AM PM flag on it too. But then there's real weirdness where you could compare that 0.5 in an Excel sheet to, say, a date, which then would be the number of milliseconds in the plain text, or it seems like it's the number of milliseconds. It might actually just be the number of seconds, since the Linux epoch, which those two really are comparing apples to oranges. And you can get even crazier, certainly, as you can have currencies, you can have just numbers for counting certain things. Weirdly, there is not really a binary formatting option. There's, I'm not even sure, a percentage formatting option. And so, because Excel sheets come from accounting first and foremost, there's just that narrow perspective in which everything is made. And so I'm really using Google Sheets, bending over backwards to make it do something it really is not designed for. When ideally what I really would want is a calendar of some sort, some kind of programmable calendar program that would allow me to submit via a form like Google Sheets does when the game is scheduled on YouTube, and then put that information in a calendar event. This might be one of those cases where very well, maybe one of those cases where I can't win. We'll try our best to just play correctly here. Weirdly leads me to putting things in defense mode. But yeah, because I'm really trying to force the Google Sheets to do something crazy, I'm having to try and learn SQL queries to filter out the data, vertical lookups, horizontal lookups, potentially too, and just getting information to line up the way I really want it to do, to line it up. I was able to write, for instance, a formula to take today's date and take the latest date for the latest scheduled video, and then run a sequence of having a row for every single day in between today's date and the latest scheduled video, which that requires me to learn just sequence and then formulate a lot of time requirements to get that to it. There's a lot of taking a date and converting a date into a date time format versus taking it just being text originally. When you submit it as a form, it's basically being submitted as text. I could have changed that, but it would require redoing my macro, which would be even more of a mess. And there's a timestamp as far as when the information is submitted on the form, but that's not the date that matters. The date is the actual date that the video is scheduled. And trying to learn the right way to make a pivot table, the right way to get any of the charts to actually work. To a certain extent, I question if maybe what I'm trying to do really cannot be depicted visually with a chart. But yeah, that's what I've been kind of wasting my time with. Well, I was also letting my macro schedule YouTube Shorts. I managed to drop something behind a desk effectively, and in moving the desk to pick up the thing, I realized it was fairly dirty around it, so then I started cleaning today and then exhausted myself doing that. Lose 800 now. I don't think we want to do that. Over the weekend, though, it doesn't feel like there's been too much news. I feel like the Tokyo Game Show might be happening right now, and because of that, that may have limited what would have been announced over the weekend. But I also just feel like we're increasingly getting to a point where now is not the time to expect a lot more announcements, as games are going to start just coming out for the Black Friday, Christmas, fourth quarter. Outside of messing far too much about with the Excel sheet, I did finish playing the Blob and made the same mistake that I always do. Which is to go way too long in the final episode. And yeah, the Blob has some real problems. I was hoping that there would be a save your progress mode or something like that that would unlock after beating it, or that there would be some new ability or something that would have unlocked by beating the game. But no such luck, so it would just be incredibly frustrating to try and unlock everything in the Blob, playing each level 3 or 4 times, with all progress being reset each time. One of those gameplays being a need for a speedrun, which it would be very difficult to do some of the levels in the times they're setting, because I'm taking like an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes to do a level, and then they want me to beat it in like 20 minutes, and I'm like, I maybe could pull that off if I just ran, but you definitely couldn't do anything else, and you definitely do have a feeling like there is a somewhat high focus on doing all of the challenges in one run, which that's just not likely to happen. It just is not going to really happen that you would be able to paint 100% of all of the things. Now, evermore, if I was a real programmer, a game programmer with the funding and resources and all of that, I really do feel like you could make a Minecraft clone, Minecraft/Roblox clone, that took the idea of primary colors, red, green, and blue, and mixed them together for secondary colors, and then mixed all of those together to like a pure white, or had the full lacking of mixing all of them together and gave you a black, and then brown should somehow be makeable too. But yeah, you take those concepts and then you make like a liquid red, a solid red, a gas red, and even maybe a plasma red, and then you have the 4 states of matter on top of the primary colors, and you can have a very educational Minecraft clone where, unlike Minecraft where you're just mining through a lot of dirt and a lot of stone and there's nothing you can do with the dirt and stone, you could have a mining through dirt, potentially returning solid red and solid yellow, since dirt is brown, and yellow and red at some percentages would be brown. And then you could use that as this very balanced currency system in a procedurally generated world. Plus you could use those colors to paint things. A modern take on Minecraft could almost certainly take the square grid way in which things are displayed and fake more variety, more of a jagged edge. see if this activates twice. And so, yeah, you could just say wherever you're looking, add some jagged edges, even if technically everything really is still just a block. And yeah, you could rip off certainly a lot of the other concepts that are in Minecraft and Roblox. But you'd also want to throw in some new complex concepts. As far as trying to compare the blob to Splatoon, I mean, it has kind of a paint concept, but it doesn't implement anything in its paint concept that is anything like Splatoon. And the liquid physics concept of Splatoon is almost certainly way better than what the blob does with it. The blob is weirdly controlling as far as what you can do with the paint and what it wants you to do with the paint. Just go ahead and activate all of these. The blob has actual challenges where it tells you to paint certain buildings a certain way instead of letting you be creative with it. So yeah, I finished playing that, and I don't think I did anything else as far as making footage. Still trying to find some streaming services, some new things on the streaming services. Watched like 2 bad movies in the Friendship Game and Suspiria, of which I would really recommend bothering to watch. I do know Suspiria is a remake of a cult classic movie, but I didn't pay any attention to it, nor did I see anything particularly interesting in it. I think Suspiria probably sells itself in the idea that you're going to see a bunch of like World War I, World War II, German dance troupe, lady girls' butts, and maybe some boobs, but I'm so immune to that in modern days that you can just go to like Pornhub or a site like that to see it way better. And dancers in particular are known for having exercised all their lives as a dance troupe for being very flat-chested and not having very big butts, because they are just constantly exercising and never getting enough extra calories and resources to develop secondary sex characteristics and boobs and butts and things like that. So it's not really even the type of body types most people would want to see. Caught up on one more dubbed episode of Bleach, which those episodes are very low quality in my opinion. They feel like they're being rushed, and it really just feels like every episode is an homage to a battle that probably happened through several issues in the manga and is way more interesting to look at in the manga, whereas it feels like in the episodes you get introduced to a bad guy, you have a fight with that bad guy, and then the bad guy is defeated in one episode, and that is just ridiculously too fast for the Bleach series. Then I'm pretty much, I think, given up on Ghost Whisperer. That show's not getting any better quick enough. Did I watch anything else? Yes. I found out that Amazon Prime Video has all of Season 3 of Lower Decks. And since I've been playing Lower Decks on my cell phone, I thought I'd watch that. And honestly, I was fairly disappointed in it. Like, First of all, because I've been playing Lower Decks, I already had voices in my head for what the characters would sound like and the level of attitude in their voices, and it's just kind of not there in Lower Decks. Nor is the Lower Decks TV Season 3 actually that funny. Like, it definitely was my thought that Lower Decks was supposed to be, let's kind of make a Star Trek based Rick and Morty with crazier events happening, to the point of it not really even feeling like it could possibly be in the overarching Star Trek universe. And yeah, that's not really the case. There's too much of a connected story and too much drama. There's aspects, certainly, in Lower Decks that once it is being serious, it then smacks in the face of the original Star Trek fans who would have been fans of the original series, or even the second generation of fans who would have been fans of the next generation. This is much more, Lower Decks feels like it is for fans of Voyager and Deep Space Nine at best, which is already quite a bit of a jump. I didn't see in the entire season to make really any reference to Enterprise, which, well, they did mention like a temporal Cold War, so one reference, I guess. But yeah, part of the issue will be that some of the characters' voices don't sound like the characters, so if you run into Quark in an episode, he doesn't really sound like the Quark of Deep Space Nine, in my mind. Part of the issue is that they have one character that has who opted for putting on a elective surgery mechanism on his eye and in his brain, which that's the idea of augmenting yourself is not foreign to Star Trek, but it is foreign that you would be allowed to do it just optionally, electively, because if that was the case, then everybody would be doing it. You have a vain character that's always exercising, and that's just not what you would expect from the Federation people. And then you have nepotism in one of the main characters, and that's just not something you see a ton of. It is effectively almost, well, I guess you do see a little bit of that in Next Generation, in that Will Wheaton was effectively being given extra advantages than Wesley Crusher was given extra advantages as a character on the Enterprise. There's a decent amount of callbacks verbally, but not really any like visual callbacks. But there's just no comedy in it. All the voices seem different from what I expected, which that may be a unique problem to just me, but yeah. I definitely was expecting something much, much more like Rick and Morty, where they would run into aliens that are just kind of ridiculous, or they would do things that are really ridiculous that even the lowest ranked member of the Federation would never do. They've run into weirder aliens. Yeah. I almost expect it to be like you would have run into the kinds of aliens that you've seen in Rick and Morty, the bird people, and just joke characters. And I'm not saying that Lower Decks had to out Rick and Morty, but it needed to be a lot closer to what it is. And Rick and Morty would always have Rick Sanchez as a major element, though, so yeah, he wouldn't You wouldn't repeat that. I would say the Lower Decks mobile game does a really bad job of introducing the characters and explaining what they are too. Like, I definitely was getting a different feeling from what they were. Yeah, I'm going in circles here. But yeah, I watched all of Season 3, which means I haven't seen Season 1 or Season 2. They're promoting Season 4, and that's why it's on Amazon Prime, which just highlights how Amazon Prime as a video service is sadly getting worse and just becoming advertisement for the Peacock and other services, more expensive streaming services that are totally not worth purchasing. Yeah, and I don't know what you really do with Star Trek. So, I think both Star Trek and Star Wars as concepts need to be very cautious on how much saturation they make as far as the interest there and the level of quality of what they make. It would probably make sense that maybe you could make Lower Decks and you could make Star Trek, whatever the newest Star Trek is, but as far as the TV series, you can't really do anything with the movie series. I don't think you're going to get Scott Bakula or any of those actors to do a movie, although if they were up for it, maybe you could have some kind of crossover thought that might work. Since Enterprise is about the Temporal Cold War quite a bit, you could potentially have them go through time, and I don't know. You really can't do anything with the original series actors, they're all too old. You could have like George Takei maybe show up and that's it, but even him, he is probably fairly old. You can certainly have them interact with the Next Generation characters or the Deep Space Nine characters and the Voyager characters, so you could try to have a merger of all of that. And even at that, I would still suspect you would just be making a direct-to-video video. And I think you probably abandoned the J.J. Abrams, what is it called, the Kepler Universe Star Trek reboots, because while that made those movies, they can't really go any further unless you're going to make movies now with a whole new cast of characters replacing the Next Generation actors. Anyways, I'm supposed to be talking about video games and I'm fairly distracted. I got a nice comment that I'm hoping and I'm going to assume is true and real and not just some kind of bot, although it wouldn't be surprising if we start to see YouTubers getting very long carrying messages from fans that are just ChatGPT scripted experiences. But yeah, I got this nice letter from a fan talking about how impactful my videos were, and yeah, that's a really nice thing to see. You definitely don't get that as a YouTuber. This is the first time in probably the entirety of my channel that I've had. No, there's probably been maybe 4 or 5 other appreciative posts I've gotten in 11 years, but for the most part you don't get any appreciations. At best you get a like, and YouTube doesn't really highlight when you get likes. But yeah, it was certainly a nice thing to have. and receive. Of course, on another level, it also creates this weird situation where my channel in particular has been all over the place as far as different types of content, and so this person was commenting on watching my Lego coverage when they were like 11 years old or something very young there, and in that same, like, on the same channel I've also covered adult games, and in these live streams we talk about adult games, so it's just all over the place. There's no consistency there, and I don't really want there to be any kind of consistency. I have a channel that where I can talk about any game of it for any age group and cover it while staying in with the bounds of YouTube's family-friendly guidelines. Let's start going through the video game news. Microsoft has apparently targeted a 2028 launch for its next Xbox console, which certainly that gives you 4 more years to consider things there. Court documents suggest it could be even more flexible in the terms of available models next gen, which, yeah, there's no telling what a console would look like 4 years from now. Like, there are technologies now that aren't in the Xbox Series X, I'm sure, and those technologies may be mature enough that they would be in the next generation of consoles, and there's technologies just being developed right now that might even be available 4 years from now. In particular, the vertical, I think it's called vertical TFT ways of making circuitry, just to get down to a more dense form of let's go ahead and see what we can add here. Even more dense form of circuitry. Yeah, I don't think that worked as well as I had hoped. As far as the more flexible design on the next Xbox, like I've said it before, so it will be, I don't want to get too repetitive, but I definitely could see making a smaller version of the Xbox to try to target like Asian and Japanese markets, smaller than the Xbox Series S. I could see having an external 4K UHD Blu-ray elements that would be just pluggable through USB-C type Thunderbolt or USB-C connector. We potentially could even get to the point where there is an upgradable graphics card or replaceable graphics card in what a Xbox could do, the next Xbox potentially could do, assuming it is actually called an Xbox, which I'd assume it would be. There's a ton of software stuff, obviously, that should be in an Xbox, next Xbox. Things like smart home controlling and just better integration with smart home devices and streaming devices. Pretty obviously there should be Chromecast type features to it. There's a wish list of things you could certainly do nicely around it, in that it could have a central speaker built into it and it could have a Alexa type device built into it too, although it would almost have to at this point, because they've given up on Cortana and all that, be a licensed product with either Apple or Amazon or Google to have that smart home capability. In a lot of ways, I could see Microsoft being big enough to say, hey, we're going to build this device, but we're going to license it in such a way that you get your pick of Google Home, Alexa, or the Apple AirPod 1, 2. So you could just pick one of those 3 voice assistants and one of those 3 infrastructures. They'll target better power saving. It'd be nice if discs have disc changers, but they're not going to bother with that. And inherently, if you really wanted a disc changer, having an external 4K UHD Blu-ray player as an option, and I could even see them having an expensive 4K UHD Blu-ray player and a cheaper just Blu-ray player for discs. But like potentially being able to plug in 2 of those to swap out discs even seems believable. But yeah, upgradable RAM would be nice. It's probably not going to happen. Upgradable replaceable CPU would be nice. Probably not going to happen. It's probably not the case that the next Xbox would have significantly different speeds of RAM, speeds of CPU, amounts of video RAM, amounts of GPU power. They tend to want to keep all of those the same, so even if you were going to introduce a third style of Xbox, you're not going to probably see them change out those core elements, unless they want to make a third tier Xbox that is specifically built around VR, which would require them to go back into VR. A wishlist idea certainly that I'd like to see in any console is the idea of getting away from the TV potentially and putting on augmented reality or VR glasses, with maybe even wireless streaming on that. But yeah, I don't know what else you can really add to a Xbox. You could get crazy. You could add a MagSafe charger on the front of it, so you just put your phone on the side of your Xbox and it starts charging. Just really have to think about what kind of gadgets do people buy, and would it make any sense to integrate those features into it. Like an Apple Watch doesn't integrate particularly well to an Xbox, and wouldn't see any functionalities crossover around that. Although I could see maybe some health statistics, like a LiDAR camera in the front of an Xbox looking at the players, taking their temperature, taking their blood pressure rates like that. Things like that could happen, but I don't really think you would go that way. A camera in general being an accessory you can plug in, I don't really see a reason why it needs to be built in. It would make some sense to just take advantage of video chat and things like that. Again, though, that really could just be used to see, and it makes a lot of sense for a camera to be detachable and come out as an accessory. Like, there's actually very little that needs to be built directly into an Xbox, because it is effectively just a computer. So yeah, and when I build a computer today, I'm putting less components into a computer today than I was 10, 15, 20 years ago, because you're not adding sound cards, you're not adding video capture cards. There might be an argument to have video capture or video pass-through and surround sound things, but you can't put a giant amp of any quality into an Xbox console. That would be too expensive, or it'd just be really low quality. A subwoofer potentially with a center speaker built in might be interesting, but I question if you can actually have a subwoofer and a center speaker connected at the same time. And anything, a center speaker on an Xbox or the next Xbox would probably be like tilted up to bounce off the ceiling for like a upfiring Dolby Atmos concept. LED lighting, certainly. You could have a connection to control LED lighting, or you could have LED lighting just built in. I think it would make a lot more sense if you had just a small number of general purpose input and output pins on a connector on an Xbox for TV backlighting and things like that, or just controlling LEDs in your room. Still really don't know what I'm doing here. But maybe I'm winning. Interesting, there's this loading circle here that comes up. If I click on it, it pops up. That's new. That would be very helpful on the touchscreen. And certainly there's a lot of room for new and interesting stuff in the next Xbox in 2028, but like, while you may have a higher circuitry for encryption as far as a TPM, Trusted Platform Module, or higher levels of just large language model artificial intelligence circuitry, as far as being able to do text to speech, or even maybe render visuals and backgrounds. Like, if you did put in circuitry specifically around AI art generation, AI text generation, AI music generation, it would be an experiment, certainly, to see how many programmers can engage with that and really do anything. Yeah, I really question, without going the VR route, that there's really a need for a third tier of Microsoft consoles. But there is room, certainly, for a split to say, hey, a lot of these people have 1080p screens. They have no desire to buy a TV. TVs have just become commodities, and people are watching less and less TV to justify owning a TV, even for gaming exclusively, or monitors in general. So selling a graphics card that's a little weaker because it's targeting 1080p as a model makes sense. And then selling one without a disk drive makes sense. And having a higher graphics card for VR makes sense. But that's about the only thing there. It's like, generally, if I was going to build a computer right now, for basically anybody, I would have a base model of CPU, a minimum on GPU, a motherboard, and a minimum on RAM. And then I might talk to the person and say, hey, do you need a little bit more RAM? Do you need a little bit more GPU? And then that would probably be it. I might compromise a little bit on the CPU if they had a budget, but I probably wouldn't go anything lower than a 3.8 gigahertz, at least 8 core, 16 thread CPU. I probably wouldn't go super high above that either in targeting like a 5 gigahertz, 32 core, 64 thread type CPU would be probably too much. 16 gigs is about the minimum of RAM, whereas 64 to 128 would be about the maximum. And certainly there might be some compromises on the speed of the RAM in favor of the quantity of the RAM, or vice versa, probably more vice versa, and that I would prefer to have 64 gigabits of RAM that was a little bit faster than I would 128 gigabytes of RAM that's slower. Yep. And inherently, there's a lot of speculation I just did based on a conversation that's just coming out due to the Activision Blizzard merger lawsuit, I think is what this is all around. There's a question read, is the plan for 2028 to keep the illegible, like, this has probably been blacked out, like model, or force a Windows-like flexible capabilities like model? And then the response here is, we've already started this journey with the Xbox One and the Xbox One X, and furthering in Series S and Series X, which is to basically said no. We need to be even more flexible going forward with Gen 10, but also provide the ability for creators to take advantage of unique hardware capabilities. So, and that's pretty much the entirety of this article, is just around that one simple response in the 4Ks. What they mean by flexibility could be a lot of different things. Need to keep on playing. Let's see. I believe it's the new CEO of YouTube is highlighting and praising this 15 years of YouTube in India, which, yeah, there's a lot of success that's happened as far as Indian creators having unique information and helpful information, usually somewhat technical or mathematical based videos. Well, I guess I should have activated that faster. Although it seems like this guy can just attack over and over again. So I could have probably survived that. Yeah, we definitely want to get one more victory to get to this point. Then I could see moving over to ranked and then maybe coming back to here. Noticeably, it doesn't even feel like it's that much of a challenge to get further, but the difference between each one of these is 1,000, basically 2 wins, where the difference previously past this point has been 500. So you're actually having to get 2 wins to get 2 legacy packs, which are pretty poor rewards. Yeah. Borderlands is increasingly putting out shift codes again. It's almost like they just forgot that shift codes were a thing. Or maybe they were thinking that they were going to stop being on Facebook, Twitter, whatever this is. Twitter, yeah. X, whatever. I heard somebody calling it 10, just to probably make fun of it. Video Games Chronicle has an article here. The game Lies of P Game Pass hits Game Pass a day early ahead of its Tuesday general release. I saw someone kind of review Lies of P. It's basically a Bloodborne game. It doesn't sound like it's terrible, although it doesn't seem like it's particularly amazing either. If you haven't played Bloodborne, I would say definitely play Bloodborne. If you've already played Elden Ring, Bloodborne, and all the Demon Souls, Dark Souls games, then Lies of P is ready for you at that point. There is also a GameDeveloper.com article here that says there's a report that Unity has narrowed its controversial runtime fee policy, which, yeah. The amount of anger, particularly from developers, who probably have a lot of built-up anger around everybody. Like, I imagine people in IT and programming are generally frustrated with all of humanity and angry. Certainly, I could relate to that. But the amount of anger that came out around that, I don't know if that gets fixed in any way. If John Riccitiello stepped down, that would be a big help. There's a lot of speculation, though, it's not even John Riccitiello, as much as it might just be that Unity went open and then a bunch of money-hungry people got added to the board of Unity. If Unity got bought by a company, it might help, but honestly, if it was bought by Microsoft, Microsoft is money-hungry and greedy too, or if it got bought by Jeff Bezos, Amazon.com, that wouldn't be... they're money hungry too, and that's just going to be the case with any company that possibly could buy Unity. And when you've managed to do the one thing that people would have probably argued was impossible, which is convince people halfway through the development of their game to change engines, you've really screwed up. To the point where it's very possibly not recoverable. See how this works. And there was definitely a lot of other problems, certainly with the way Unity seems to have acted, in that they seemingly and possibly illegally changed the terms and conditions unilaterally in the contract and made it so that you're bound to these new terms and conditions while you're halfway through developing a game, even if you were using an older version of Unity and you started developing the older version of the Unity on the grounds of understanding the contract as it originally was. And it just screams shadiness, and you just shouldn't do business with shady people in any case. Like, if somebody is willing to screw over somebody else, then they're going to be willing to screw over you. And if they're willing to screw over you once, they're going to be willing to screw you over again. But I do think, for the sanity of just gamers, we're probably in a better position, because this whole Unity outrage, I think, is going to stop being talked about, but it's just going to be felt, certainly, that people, when deciding what engine to use in their next game, are going to laugh at the concept of using Unity. And there's potentially no recovering from that. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Starfield is the 5th fastest selling game in Europe this year. Noticeably though, I'm hearing from at least mainstream video game journalists, it's still really hard to get any feedback from actual gamers, that they're increasingly dissatisfied with Starfield. There's some bad quality content in it, there's a lot of bugs, there's a lack of features, field of view sliders, a lot of stuff that to have a proper experience would require you to actually mod in. Okay. But yeah, that I'm still not really hearing anybody talk about just the level of what am I trying to say here? Yeah, I'm not really hearing anybody talk about Starfield as far as what the story goes to, or the gameplay elements there. It definitely feels like, compared to even the experience of Skyrim, there's just less to talk about. When I think about Skyrim, you start off captured, you get attacked by a dragon, you go up towards that central city, you're given a bunch of quests. Eventually you realize you're a dragonborn, and you gain that first dragon tongue spell, Fusru Da, I believe it is, and then you use that quite a bit. You fight a dragon in one of the quests from the central cities. Then you have 4 or 5 other major cities that you at some point can decide to go to, and entering each one of those cities has its own special little event, some of which are not super interesting, but like the Assassin's Guild quests are fairly interesting, and choosing one side of the Civil War versus the other is interesting. And at one point in the Civil War you have to sneak in, and at one point you're protecting or assassinating the Emperor as part of the Assassin's Creed quest and the Assassin's Guild quest. There's a whole bunch of special weapons that lead to the Daedalic gods, or Daedric gods, I think they were. There's a whole bunch of random caves, and it feels like maybe there are no caves whatsoever in Starfield. There's a point in Skyrim where you're completely under the surface, and there's this giant cave system with the Dwemer, and so there's a lot of that. Then there's DLC with vampires, and there's ability to become a werewolf in the main game. Then you go to the mages temple also, and then focus more on magic in each of those skill sets. There's at least one major area where you're focused on those skill sets. There's just a lot of that, and I haven't heard anybody say anything about any of that. And maybe people are just trying too hard to be spoiler free on Starfield. But yeah, I kind of want to see a spoiler review at this point just to get a general idea. I did hear, and this is about the only thing I've heard as far as context around Starfield, is that there is a fairly simplistic puzzle game probably somewhat in lines with the Dragon Claw door puzzles in Skyrim, where you have a Dragon Claw, the answer to the puzzle is on the Dragon Claw, so you just have to look at it, and then you spend a little bit of time spinning the wheels to put in the combination key. Although in Starfield it seems like the puzzle is even more it is simplistic but takes longer to actually accomplish, and it's repetitive, so it definitely feels more like a time waster. Alright, let's see what we can do here. What, if anything, these can accomplish. But at a certain level, yeah. If Starfield sells long enough and people already own it, and then there's a fairly quick amount of updating Starfield and fixing it, the Starfield of 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now might be considerably better, and I'd say Skyrim probably is a lot better than it was on day 1 too. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, is being quoted here saying the strike authorization would provide the maximum leverage against game companies. Despite the multi-day bargaining sessions, the companies are refusing to meet our members' needs in vital areas, is the subquote here. So this is that the SAG-AFTRA president, Fran Drescher, yes, the actress from The Nanny, has called on union members to support a strike authorization vote, which is not to say that they would strike immediately. It's the step before that that you basically need in any union if you're going to have any teeth at all. Unions have very little ways of influencing management or having any threat against management if management happens to know that the negotiating board, the group of people who are negotiating for the new contracts or negotiating in general, don't have the support of their members to the point where the members won't strike. If you're going up for contract negotiation and your union is just lacking that solidarity and wouldn't strike, that just means either your union is very weak amongst its members or your union is fairly happy amongst its members, and that puts the negotiators in a weird situation where they're probably just going to be able to push for a continuation of the existing contract and hopefully no backsliding to worse pay and worse work conditions. No, I don't want to actually activate that, but whatever, I guess I have no choice. But yeah, you almost always see unions voting to authorize a strike. That doesn't in any way connect to the strike actually happening. Although, probably does make a lot of sense that SAG-AFTRA, just being very new to the video game industry in general, that it would end up striking to just establish the beginnings of a contract. Just anything at all, any kind of limitations on hours or work conditions or any kind of minimum pay or guaranteed employment, which that really would be the first thing that the video game industry would need to do as it moves to potentially unionizing, and it's also important to point out that this SAG-AFTRA guild is pretty much just video game voice actors at the moment, and maybe some QA testers. But yeah, if I was negotiating here, I would definitely say, let's talk guaranteed employment. Here are the grounds as far as where an employee could be laid off, and where you would have to negotiate with us if you want to lay off people, and here are the grounds of where somebody can be fired for cause or just fired in general, and here's the appeals process that you have to involve the union with, and we may have to go to arbitration if you do try to fire somebody. But yeah, just maintaining your union membership by maintaining people's employment is one of the first steps that has not been done as far as unionizing the video game world. And we see that nearly on a daily basis of video game companies just laying off people, and as soon as a game project is done. And yeah, you really cannot have a union where you potentially have a video game company that's a union shop, so all the employees are union members and have to be union members, but then all the employees are constantly just getting fired and replaced with new people. That really wouldn't work. Any progress or any relationship or any solidarity even you would have built up would be lost with every time an employee is laid off and replaced with a new employee who would effectively be too close to a scab for comfort. And also, it's without making that first step of having contracted guaranteed employment, you potentially create a bad situation that can happen in unions, in which the unions only care about the most senior employees or only care about the highest paid associate level employees, and are screwing over the newest employees, which that isn't really very united as far as a union. There is a certain level that, yes, the most senior employees tend to have more higher pay and more benefits, but you try not to make that gap huge. This isn't video game related, but Ubuntu 23.10 has restored the ZFS file system support in its installer, which is a indication that ZFS as your main hard drive is increasingly becoming acceptable, whereas once it was not recommended at all because it was just too unstable, too new of a technology. Video Games Chronicle says Pokemon in the Van Gogh. People pronounce it Van Gogh, but it's supposed to be Van Gogh, as I've heard it. Anyways, the Van Gogh Museum have announced a collaboration. Pokemon previously partnered with the Munich Museum. Now, which Van Gogh Museum is this? The one in France? Or a different one? Because I think there's probably 2 or 3. But maybe there's only one called the Van Gogh Museum. I might just have... There might be several museums that have had the Van Gogh collection. The question here, though, as far as what does this really even mean? Yeah, neither the Pokemon Company nor the Van Gogh Museum elaborated on what the collaboration will consist of. But it will launch on September 28th, so not very far away. Looking at the trailer, I see just a Pikachu and Eevee running in a field of sunflowers. A reference to Van Gogh's Sunflowers painting. And then they look up into the sky, and then there's a new texture art style, much more in the paintbrush style of the Van Gogh museums, but now all the sunflowers are Pokemon saying sunflowers. There's, let's see, this one painting, and that may be the entirety of the collaboration here. So for all we know, this is just a Pokemon walking around. What is that? Pokemon Go collaboration, which I'm not even sure the Van Gogh Museum would appreciate that. Alright, so we got to the last bit of gyms, so it would benefit me to play a little bit of ranked and see if we can get up to platinum while we have free time here, although I probably should just stop playing. 2. Although I kind of feel like I'm probably not in that big of a rush, because there just really wasn't that much news. With the whole Unity thing, Godot engine is just getting more and more coverage and more success. Here, the Godot engine retweeted this jokester going, "OMG, hackers just leaked the full Godot source code. Now anybody can make their own game engine by pulling it apart and adding any feature they think it's missing. I mean, you could slap a new logo on it and call it yours and nobody would stop you." I think there might be some attribution in the licensing that's required for Godot engine, but maybe not. There are definitely licenses, open source licenses, where you don't have to actually attribute. But the joke here, which I can see people not getting, is that the Godot engine has always been open source. So it's not hackers, the makers of the Godot engine, which I hear may have started from a couple of like Spanish game developers. So fairly small start as far as the number of people who originally created it, and it probably has a decent way to go as far as just getting optimized and more people working on it. If everybody who used Unity now went over to the Godot engine and was submitting code to the engine itself and optimizing it, it still potentially could take 7 to 8 years before the Godot engine was a real competitor to something like the Unreal Engine or even the Unity engine. But better to start now than never. But yeah, it's an open source project. Hackers didn't leak the source code. The source code's always been out there. Xbox has a Japanese Twitter, which this is what I'm assuming indicates here that the Tokyo Game Show has started now, which that would make some sense. Here we can see, I think, Phil Spencer in a pretty decent stage. Weirdly, it does definitely seem like the Xbox logo and branding that they're using here is still the green branding, so either they found that the new branding didn't work for Xbox in Japan, or they are hinting at the going back to green globally. You'd think it would be consistent as far as the branding. You can see him just in jeans and a t-shirt and a coat, and that's probably not fancy enough, particularly for a Japanese audience. I don't think it's fancy enough even for a Western audience. You can see that you have a decent stage there, which is another thing that you want to see more of, is that there would be a high level of polish on the stage at the Tokyo Game Show, because while the stages can be small, they shouldn't be empty and boring to look at. It would be a mistake, certainly, if Phil Spencer came out and he was wearing, say, traditional Japanese kimono style clothes. It would be a mistake because Westerners and social justice warriors and armchair activists would say that's racist for a white guy to wear Japanese clothing. The Japanese people would probably be more than ecstatic to see him honor their clothing style by wearing it, but certainly you could see how that might even backfire or if they feel like they're just being pandered to. But it certainly would make a lot of sense for him to dress in a suit and look like any other Japanese CEO for any other Japanese company, or video game company at least. Phil Spencer in particular needs to be more dressed up as the guy in charge of Xbox compared to, say, a more artistic creative director, such as the directors of Final Fantasy or Bayonetta or Death Stranding, which those guys have more of a laid-back dress. Although in all fairness, some of those guys also have kind of a high fashion dress too, so it's not just that they're wearing jeans, they're wearing expensive jeans that show off that they bought it at a high price to look highly fashionable, and they're trying for more of a J-pop idol look, probably in a kind of ridiculous amount, but okay. Weirdly can't activate this, so let's just start with this. So I suspect over this week we'll get several announcements of games. We are just going to generally try and figure out what like just destroyed my own card, basically. Can't destroy any of these. Try and figure out what kind of games get announced and shown at Tokyo Game Show. There's definitely a lot of room there for Tokyo Game Show to become the big event. There's, I think, a little bit more room to separate between when Tokyo Game Show happens and Gamescom, but not that. They're not too close to each other. The Steam Deck OS version 3.5 is in the preview channel, including improvements to the default color rendering on the Steam Deck, new display color settings, auto-mounted external drives, and a whole bunch of just other improvements and fixes. But yeah, it is interesting to point out there that the Steam Deck is at, Steam OS in particular, is at version 3.5 when the Godot engine is older, I believe, probably a lot older by at least a year or two, and it's not even at version 3. But then again, the major number of versions of any software are either politically changed or they are solely dependent on how significant a major version's amount of change is in the minds of the developers. There is a lot of software that only changes a major number version if there is something fairly breaking happening in the updates. That's why you have like the Linux kernel version 4.25 or something like that. Where then there are other developers who want to change the major version as fast as possible to just get to a higher number. A great example of that also is the chip model number for the iPhone 15 Pro is like the A17 chip, when it would make a lot of sense for it to instead be an A15 chip for the iPhone 15 Pro. And I believe for the regular iPhone 15, the chip is actually still the A16. And so those two numbers feel like they should be the same and overlap. Skip a generation or something like that to get them to line up. I priced out what it would cost to get a MacBook Pro and versus getting a framework laptop, which this is definitely not comparing apples to apples in that, but it looks like a decent build for a framework laptop would be about $2,600, which is quite a bit, but not that crazy for a laptop, a gaming laptop, high-end laptop. And you're hoping with the framework laptop in particular that you would only spend maybe $800 to replace the motherboard and the GPU, which even swapping those two in the newest version of the framework laptop is not 100% necessary, because you can get a GPU attachment to it that is its own separate thing. So there is a path to upgrading on the framework laptop for about $2,600, whereas for a MacBook Pro it's about $2,000 with no path to upgrading. Of course, you almost never would have any kind of overlap on the types of people who would be trying to buy those two types of laptops, because if you're getting the MacBook Pro, you're almost certainly not trying to get into gaming and you like the Mac Apple iOS operating system, although there is a decent argument now that it is effectively just the iPhone iOS operating system and not its own separate Mac OS operating system, that maybe you're not that interested in sticking with Mac and Apple because of that. Whereas if you're getting a framework laptop, you're looking for a laptop that can game almost certainly, which Apple doesn't care about gaming, particularly on their MacBooks. To get back to video games, as far as how this would connect, as I was just thinking there, I don't really need a laptop, and if anything, the last time I did have a gaming laptop, it was a very poor disappointment in just how little I actually was able to use it and how short of an amount of time it lasted. But someone, a YouTuber, managed to take the framework hardware and convert it into something that looks very much like a Steam Deck. So I was pricing it out on the comparison there, which the pricing doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you can get old framework hardware or really cheap framework hardware. The most expensive Steam Deck at $600 or thereabout is still $2,000 cheaper than getting a framework laptop, and I don't know if you really are getting $2,000 more performance if you're buying a framework laptop. And clearly it makes a lot more sense if you're trying to get into PC gaming and PCs, to either build your own PC, which maybe at most would cost you $1,800 if you're conservative on it and just not crazy, not buying the biggest, most powerful graphics cards, biggest, most powerful CPUs and GPUs and RAM amounts and motherboards. Plus, if you build a PC, you have a lot of components that potentially could be upgraded or carried over, or something that's just easier to dust and potentially fix. I still very much think you probably should get an Intel CPU. Like, I've had a lot of problems with this AMD Ryzen CPU, just way more than I feel like I should have. But at the very least, if you spent $150 to $200 on a computer case, you can definitely use that computer case again. And monitors and mouses and keyboards and things like that. But then the really, really cheap thing, compared to even getting a framework components handed down and making a Steam Deck yourself using framework components, is to just buy the Steam Deck. Again, the Steam Deck at its highest is $600. At its cheapest, it's probably about $400. And yeah, Steam Deck can dock into it, can give you the Linux, Arch Linux, SteamOS desktop mode, and for the most part that is perfectly fine. The only thing I would say is it is a little bit of a shame that we don't have just more video playing features integrated into the Steam Deck better. It's like, you'd think you'd want Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and Hulu and Disney Plus, all of those as their own special apps, that Valve would just let there be a special category for that. But yeah, even to just play a YouTube video is probably more of a hassle than it should be on the SteamOS. That would be the main thing I'd do extra on a SteamOS, is I'd watch streaming video and I would look at websites every now and then. So I would like to get away from that, or do that without there being a big struggle to play video. Playing music, calculators, things like that. There are some basic applications, I guess. Inherently, I guess what it comes down to would be, can you replace a cell phone with a Steam Deck? Maybe not in making phone calls, but in everything else you might do with your average cell phone. Because if you can pull that out, that would be nicer. I could see potentially handing a Steam Deck to a kid before handing them even a cell phone. I saw a device I potentially would want to play with at some point in the future called I believe it's called the T-Echo from LilyGo, which is a long-range wide area network long-range wide area network middleware device, I would say. It's probably the best way to describe it. just pick something, it doesn't really matter. This turn, but good chance I'll win next turn. So yeah, the main thing about the T-Echo as far as this middle transmitter device that would let you Bluetooth connect a cell phone through an app to it, then send an encrypted signal a long way off of the LoRaWAN network to another receiver or to a relay device to help expand the mesh network. Would be interesting to take apart and see how small the circuitry could be, in the hopes that I could squeeze it into like a smartwatch. It has a GPS built in, which is a nice feature, certainly, but it doesn't run off the ESP circuits. So it may not have USB on the go connectivity or USB-C in general, and that's another feature. I was hoping to find a device that would do that. And its mileage is going to severely vary for what it really does. It's a fairly big device with a fairly big antenna that only kind of makes sense if you're camping, and also camping with somebody who is also camping in a whole different location within maybe a mile or so away in the middle of a forest where you wouldn't get cell phone connections. So it's a fairly narrow device too. But yeah, I'm trying to see if I can make a smartwatch that, amongst doing other things, could send GPS locations to friends and family as far as where you are, so you never get lost. Although, even at that, not having ultra wideband may be fairly difficult to find somebody in a crowded area without ultra wideband helping point and pinpoint the location. Depends on how accurate your GPS signal is. And the new iPhone 15 Pro also has ultra wideband in it, so it's that's another feature for the 15 Pro. I haven't really paid a lot of attention to any of the other iPhones, but it does feel like they are being forced into USB-C, trying some new technology, some optimization. Video game news. This will be the last game we play today, too. There's a report that Nintendo tells Activision Blizzard's next console will match the PS4 and the Xbox One's performance. Remember, Nintendo also said that they would have to reconsider sharing any information with Activision Blizzard because it's about to be acquired by Microsoft, a direct competitor in the console market. It's extremely easy to manipulate statistics, though, and numbers. And it's fairly easy to make a Switch 2 or any device that on one small statistic would match the PS4 or the Xbox One. You could do quite a bit of manipulation there. Just by having the same amount of RAM but slower, having the same amount of watts that you're using but then being way less efficient. There's just a lot of different ways you could lie there, or at least stretch the truth. And at a certain point, Nintendo in particular probably needs even more power than the PS4 or Xbox One, because I bet there's considerably less optimization on average amongst developers of Nintendo games than Xbox or PlayStation games, because I imagine the makers of those types of games for Nintendo Switch are working on a smaller budget, working on a shorter timeline, and making games that they imagine are just going to be sold to kids who won't be as demanding. Here's an interesting story, although I'm not sure it really went anywhere. Bill Willingham says that Warner Brothers never paid him for The Wolf Among Us. Willingham's choice to make Fable's public domain was brought on by a desire to get back at DC Comics over money he feels he's owed after the hit Telltale game. So yeah, this is a comic book guy saying he got screwed over, which is very believable, but also it's fairly common for creatives to not really know what happened with their money, or not really know what's going on. Particularly in this case, you have an instance of Telltale, the original Telltale, going out of business going bankrupt fairly quickly after the release of The Wolf Among Us, so it is very possible that Warner Brothers never got paid, and that's why Bill Willingham never got paid. Although at a certain point it doesn't really matter if Telltale went out of business, because Warner Brothers would still need to pay Bill Willingham. Like, you can't just say, well, I didn't get paid for something, therefore I'm not going to pay you. Although, sadly, I think there probably are some legal precedents to pulling that trick. What I find more interesting around this is that he's made the Fable series public domain, which... how do you make something public domain at all? Like, definitely... it's definitely an interesting legal question in which I'm fairly certain DC would argue that it's not public domain and he doesn't have the right to make it public domain, and he can't make it public domain even if he wanted to. The quote here says, DC had no obligation whatsoever to protect the integrity and value of the IP, says Willingham, either for themselves or for third parties, Telltale for instance, nor did they owe me money for licensing the Fable rights to third parties, since such a license wasn't anticipated in our original publishing agreement. Is this a statement from Bill Willingham, or is this a statement from Warner Brothers? Oh yeah, and I guess it's important to point out that Warner Brothers is a parent company of DC Comics, so this is really even... it would have been even easier for Warner Brothers and DC to pay him. Let's see. On a Substack, the writer explained the move was incited by clashes with Warner Brothers and subsidiary DC and the media agreement between the two parties. He noted that under the struck deal, DC could change stories and characters in any way they wanted, and so by them changing characters, they're making something new that they could claim copyright on, as a at least derivative work, in the same way that Disney owns like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, but not Winnie the Pooh because Winnie the Pooh is older. And yeah, I guess he's talking about this agreement here. Toward the end of his Substack, he was direct in saying he plans to get paid for that game, saying he intends to get his 50% of the money they've owed him for years from Telltale Game and other things. Fables apparently can fall into many good hands. Sounds to me like it might be a case where he didn't have an airtight contract or any kind of contract at all, and now he's getting screwed because somebody lied to him and told him, made promises, and they didn't deliver on those promises. Which, yeah. That certainly sucks. I guess I need to play 6 more games in the festival. And we've got more daily quests, login quests, and lifetime quests. What did I actually accomplish in the lifetime? This is definitely not the kind of news you want to have come out, though, when The Wolf Among Us 2 from the new Telltale is still up in the air and a possibility. And yeah, for The Wolf Among Us as far as a comic, or Fables as a comic series, I think you probably would want to read the original Fables, but if they came out with any more, it's probably not going to be as good. The best case scenario for most comic book series is that you have a relatively short run of maybe 6 to 8 volumes, a couple years of something going. Like, I think The Sandman is probably the best, longest example of a good run, but once you're done with it, you kind of can't do anything more with it, and you just move on to the next thing. And the vast majority of comic series are either constantly ongoing, like Superman, Spider-Man, where there might be a small era of a few good volumes, but not all of the era tends to be good, or just a few stories that are good enough to make one trade paperback, or maybe 4 trade paperbacks. And the vast majority of comics just suck overall. Warner Brothers, now owned by AT&T, hasn't had much positive or negative to say lately, but I feel like there is a decent chance that Warner Brothers and AT&T and the Lego company TT Games all may just get forgotten about, and we'll just have larger and larger gaps between game releases and game announcements, and eventually AT&T will either sell off Warner Brothers or sell off parts of Warner Brothers in favor of recouping some money, or just lay off people and shutter the companies, which might also be what happens. CW, I don't think, has really anything new as a TV series, and the Warner Brothers DC movies probably will get a few more of those, but not enough to succeed alone on that. DC Comics will continue to make DC Comics, but they'll increasingly become more and more irrelevant. I really do want to... I guess I'll just have to read this Substack article. Which, yeah, it's important, I guess, to point out that Fables is also more around more things than just the Wolf Among Us story and the wolf character. Yeah, he's just claiming it's in public domain. I'd like to see how you put something in public domain. Yeah, Substack itself is another one of these spin-off services, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, where it's comic book creators trying to go off and do their own thing again, or trying to be their own thing. Substack may be a little bit weirder in that it's not 100% around the idea of making comics, though. If anything, Substack here looks very much like it is a well, this is not even. Substack almost feels like it's a federated posting service, which maybe that's what it is. I don't even know. Yeah. Substack is the home for great writing. Do your best work supported by your subscribers. It's basically a Patreon service. For writing, in a lot of ways getting away from the idea of the animation. Substack helps anyone set up a blog or email newsletter. No tech required without ads or algorithms to get in the way. You can just sustain a direct relationship with your readers and maintain full control over your creative work. That sounds interesting, but it really doesn't feel like it has much to do with comics. Although I do know that I think a decent amount of DC comic people moved over to Substack when it first launched. I don't have anything to actually say about Harry Potter Magic Awakened. I'm still just waiting to schedule that video. So here's the chart. Maybe I can even reload this. Yep, because I swapped this around a little bit. Now I'm getting all of this from SteamDB, and honestly I may have been able to just get the same information from Steam directly. It might be more logical to remake my macro to get the statistics and numbers that way, but we shall see. I don't think SteamDB is going to go anywhere, but I could be surprised. So the chart macro now has been run twice, so pretty much just ignore these previous dates with test data, but we're starting to see patterns as far as games being played between the 16th and the 18th, which would have been just Friday and today. I've changed the chart to be more logarithmic, so it focuses more on these lower games and less on Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which on today is being played more than Friday. Arguably, I could filter out CSGO. That would then corrupt the data a little bit, but it would highlight that the more important information. There's fairly consistency gameplay, it seems, around Dota, and Dota is not really that high up there, whereas the number of people playing CSGO is just so high, probably by such a large amount of bots. Having 3 million players in a 24-hour period is a little unrealistic. So then we have Baldur's Gate 3 jumping up a little bit, whereas PUBG Battlegrounds is staying about the same. And then, let's see, Apex Legends has gone down a little bit. Then we can see Naraka Blade Point has gone up, whereas the Source SDK base has gone down. Again, I could probably filter that out. Let's see, Naraka Blade Point, Source SDK Blade. Where? See, it's all a little too small in too many games. So, like when I hover over this, it tells me the names and the numbers and the color. So I should be able to see a light blue point. No, Starfield is up. Naraka Blade Point is down. And then GTA is down a little. And then a lot of things are down a little. So I've made the chart now. The question is, how do you best represent this and how do we best figure out what's going on? I think what you probably would want to do is see who has big bumps and big drops. Seems to me like Rainbow Six Siege had a bit of a bump, but who knows. And certainly because of this all being logarithmic, these numbers may not be changing enough for it to really matter. What I would want really is to just maybe set a maximum, and maybe I can do that in the chart. So these would just be considered off the charts, and then everything over 50,000 players would just cram up at the top, and then more of this screen space would be able to be shown here. And yeah, these faded colors aren't great, but yeah. Theoretically, this is supposed to be the top 100 games. I don't really feel like this is actually 100 games though. I feel like maybe the chart still either limits itself down, or I limited it down. And I could see limiting it down even more. If we just brought it down to the top 10 games, that's probably more helpful. Like right now, the only way I could talk about this is say, well, the top 10 on SteamDB as far as the 24-hour peak user players is CSGO, Dota, Apex Legends, Battlegrounds, Baldur's Gate 3, Naraka Blade Point, which is somewhat surprising, GTA 5, Rust, and Starfield. And then that's probably about the 10th point right there. Wallpaper Engine, another one that could easily be removed and filtered out. But yeah. Over a much longer period of time, this chart hopefully will show more of a general pattern, and it almost certainly would get rid of things at the very bottom like Don't Starve Together as the next game comes out. This is a little bit of a rough point to start running this macro, and the macro is somewhat slow, so it takes a little bit of time to run each right before I stream. But yeah, it's not the worst point though. This will give me effectively the beginning of October, slightly before the beginning of October to the end of the year. So we'll know the entire fourth quarter time frame as far as games of interest. And it's still doing a better job, I think, than this, which really only tells you the information for right now. It doesn't really do a great job of telling you information for later, or trending information. But noticeably, this chart is going to 100, and I think I got all the information for 100, but my chart is stopping far before 100. Let's see. Wallpaper engine is number 12. So if we had stopped at number 10, it would have been just Team Fortress 2, and even Naraka Blade Point wouldn't have made it. Although it is also sorting these by the 24-hour peak number, which even that doesn't really make sense, because this is also sorted that way. I need to double check to make sure my macro is actually grabbing the right information and not grabbing this number or this number thinking it's the 24-hour peak. But yeah, it seems like maybe 20, 25 things are being displayed. Anyways, moving on, we have a Sega Wonderland sale, which that definitely seems to me like that would be an indication that they were trying to sell Balan Wonderland. Although weirdly, I'm not seeing any Balan Wonderland here, and I don't know why in the world you would try to promote such a terrible game. Sega is much better off hoping everybody forgets that that even exists, particularly when you consider that the director of Balan Wonderland pled guilty to insider trading. Steam Deck sale still happening. It is definitely just a risky thing. Buy the old hardware right now for 20% off, which is probably the best discount you have, or buy the hardware refurbished and just hope that they don't come out with a new generation of the Steam Deck that is just significantly better. But there is a second generation of the Steam Deck does have a lot of room for things being better. The battery being replaceable, user replaceable, is almost certainly going to happen in the next Steam Deck they make. More upgradable storage, more upgradable even RAM, kind of makes sense. Better repairability, and just generally better hardware designs overall. I haven't heard anybody really complaining about the Steam Deck being easy to break, which that's nice, but I bet it's a little bit more, a little too easy to break, just as a first generation device. They may also change the controller layout, which I would be interested, to say the least, in seeing them experiment with a different controller layout. Hey, it does seem like Steam has decided to finally implement something that, and Valve has decided to finally implement this screenshot may contain mature content when showing screenshots. But weirdly, you would expect this not just to be selectable text, but it would make sense to have a click here to confirm you're 18 plus and older and see it. And weirdly, when we go from Liza P, which is doing this, to College Sex Party emoji with the 18 with a circle through it, no one, which wouldn't that imply that no one over 18 is allowed, as much as it might imply that no one under 18 is allowed? Noticeably though, in these screenshots, these are Steam, Valve friendly by the looks of it. So definitely still seems like there's just a lot of cases here where the adult games are potentially not going to follow rules that Valve implements to protect children, whereas a Souls-like fighting game like Liza P, which probably has no nudity in it at all but does have violence and gore, will follow it. And that may heavily come down to the fact that Liza P has an ESRB rating, whereas College Sex Party doesn't. Now, there is also a question about maybe the headlines and titles of a game should be blurred and censored too. But yeah. Then how do you even talk about a game if the title... And I definitely wouldn't have a problem with even a very young kid, 3-4 years old, saying the word sex and knowing in the age appropriate terms what sex is. If you can't describe or use the word sex, then you, at an even very young age, even a 2-year-old, would not be able to protect themselves enough if they, say, came onto a website that they shouldn't have, and they said, and they told their parents, I accidentally went to the sex website. If they can't explain that, that's a problem. Or if somebody tries to touch them inappropriately and they don't have the words to describe what's happening, that's a big danger too. Like, very large danger when children are disabled and mute or mentally not capable of describing what's happening to them or what's being done to them, making them even more likely to be a victim or more vulnerable to be a victim. Sega Wonderland sale. A bunch of Sega games, none of which really seems like it particularly falls under Wonderland. I guess maybe Wonderland might have something to do with Persona. 50% off Sonic Frontiers. I think there's some DLC there. Humankind is $10, 80% off, which, yeah, that's a pretty good price, but noticeably Humankind is also mixed. And I'm actually confusing Humankind here with the game Mankind. Sonic Origins is 25% off. It definitely seems like some of these are on sale because they're older games, whereas some of these are being on sale because they're big name games, and the discount on some of these games not as high as people would like. I think Sonic Origins, which is mixed reviewed, is low because they removed the previous versions of the Sonic games being emulated and didn't like that. $50 to get a Sega Wonderland collection, which we should take a look and see what that is. Games included in the collection are Persona 4 Golden, Sonic Mania, Yakuza 0, 2 Point Hospital, Endless Space 2, Dawn of War, and Total War Napoleon. That is a very diverse collection of games that probably very few people would want to play. Hyenas is coming soon, as are all of these other games. Let's see how many of these games are on the fall list. Just open all of those tabs. Total War Warhammer 3 and DLC. And then 2 Point Campus being Steam Deck verified. Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Colors Ultimate, Sonic Origins. Yeah, Sega is a fairly large company, and yet there's still a little bit less than you would think that you'd actually want to play with or check out as far as video games go. So yeah, for me, I guess buying this bundle for $50 wouldn't be terrible. I'd end up getting Total War Napoleon, which is the only game that is not on my wish list, although it is just a very weird combination of games. Then we'll just see how many of these are needed to be added to the fall list. Although even that Tacticia game, Persona Tacticia game, is not one that I really would want to put on the wish list. It is a shame that over half of all the Sonic games, on PC in particular, just are not worth playing. Like a Dragon Ishin. I could see playing this one like a Dragon Ishin, because then it seems like the story would not be as wild or crazy as the other Like a Dragon games. Although then it also wouldn't be much like the other Like a Dragon game, so why bother playing something that feels like a side story? I didn't work on the banners, and honestly I probably won't work on the banners to try to make them look any better. But yeah, we'll just live with them for now. That brings us to the Video Games Chronicle articles, which there really aren't that many. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a PlayStation 5 exclusive for at least 3 months. This all may be fairly old. News: Mortal Kombat 1 has received a Day 1 patch. I saw a little bit of somebody covering Mortal Kombat 1 for a brief second, and it was talking about the events of the previous Mortal Kombat and the Kronos lady and the timelines being reset. So it's not just a case that the timeline is being reset and nobody is aware that the timelines are being reset. So it's not really even much of a reboot in that narrative way, although narrative in a Mortal Kombat game probably doesn't matter that much. If this is supposed to be Scorpion and this is supposed to be Sub-Zero, though, I would say these characters look fairly different from what I would expect Sub-Zero and Scorpion to look like, and this I think is supposed to be Raiden, and that looks fairly different from what Raiden is supposed to look like. So in the reboot, it feels like they may have just decided to either have face scans for all of the actors and characters, or significantly change the way characters look, perhaps trying to make them look more realistic. This really looks like a dude in a Scorpion outfit or a Sub-Zero outfit more than it looks like the more cartoony magical creatures of a Mortal Kombat game. Apparently Mason Greenwood will feature in EA Sports Football Club 24. EA has confirmed. I assume this is a football player. That's about all I can say about that. We already talked about the lack of information around the Van Gogh Museum collaboration. Let's see. Skate Reboot Parkour gameplay appears online. The rival of the franchise is currently in playtesting on PC. Is the name of the game actually Skate, though? I guess it is, yeah. So seems like there's intentionally popping up these black and white cubes. I wonder if these black and white cubes are some kind of tracking software for footage to not be leaked. Obviously it doesn't seem like it matters that much, and these black and white cubes of different sizes and shapes, looks to me like it's some kind of 2D barcode, not a QR code or anything like that. Well, it certainly is distracting, and maybe that's the intention, is that this is just random things to ruin the footage. But yeah, trying to ignore the cubes, looking at this footage, it really feels like you're just watching an only up gameplay or some game test. Clearly this character is not on skates in any of this, and he's running, jumping, swinging, climbing, which those are all movements that maybe are not necessary in a skateboarding game. At the end there, he had a skateboard just appear out of nowhere. I imagine if you can program a parkour game, you could probably program a skate game on the same engine. But it does draw a line between, are you making a skating game or are you making a game with a skater as the main player who also parkours and climbs. And at a certain level, I guess maybe it makes sense to make a game where you're playing as the skater characters who do parkour and climb, because I imagine that's what skaters do a lot of, to get to the high places and do the ramps and jumps in the first place. I've often felt in previous generations of skating games that the inability to just get off the wheels and walk to a place, and maybe it would be really slow, maybe you wouldn't get points to get to that point, but to set yourself up for a jump or a launch or whatever it would be called, just to get to a specific spot, has been a feature that's been missing in most skate games. Best case scenario, you'd have a skating game where it starts you at a specific checkpoint spot, and then you can try and do the skating, and if you fail, you reset to that checkpoint spot, but you never actually get off the skateboard. That being said, this definitely feels like this is a very early skating game, and there's a decent chance that you would have a lot of competition come out and before this game is finished, and that this might be a Duke Nukem Forever type game where you're just constantly polishing it and constantly trying to add more moves and more content. In a lot of ways, the game The Blob that I was playing was pretty obviously at one point thought that it would be a skating game. It would make a lot more sense if The Blob rolled as a big sphere like a skating game and could do more tricks and could do more jumps. The Blob, as he does, can basically do a kickoff off of a wall and a slide wall grind on a wall, using his body and painting the surfaces that he touches along the way. But that's it. And even the kickoff on the walls are very awkward and poorly programmed. There is a hop up to go upstairs, but otherwise he mostly just moves forward and backwards on the surface, and that's the fastest way to move that I found with The Blob. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Unity says it will be making changes to its controversial install fee plans. Quote, "We've heard you," the company says, amid a huge developer backlash. This one, do we have a date here as far as this article? Let's see. September 7th is the tweet. I mean, September 17th. So yesterday was the tweet for this. Yeah. They're basically going to back down. They really don't have any other choice, but that doesn't mean they're going to 100% back down. And even if they did, that still doesn't really solve the problem that Unity isn't making any money, nor does it solve the problem of Unity showing its true nature and true colors as far as being willing to make such a major change without bothering to test it out or run some surveys first. It's a real great example of just poor PR, poor public relations. It would have been a lot more logical to put out a survey amongst developers and get people's feedback, and then we would have had a much smaller controversy around Unity putting out a survey asking about a per install fee as a possible way of paying, and then that small controversy about a survey would be nowhere as big as the large controversy of just changing the contracts. In a lot of ways, this also just screams like somebody too high up in management thought that they were a genius and that they could just pull off some 5D level chess move and it wouldn't cause any controversy or problems whatsoever, or they're just a jerk and didn't care. Either one is very possible. We assume that's John Riccatello, but it really could be any manager high enough, any board member. Let's see, Marvel Avengers has dropped to $3.99 ahead of its delisting later this month. The game's single player and multiplayer will continue to be available. Why would you buy a game like Marvel Avengers, which people didn't even really like that much, when you know the game is going to be delisted in a month? Even if you could continue to play it, why would you want to play it? Noticeably here too, couldn't even tell you who this lady is supposed to be. And as far as the Marvel movies are concerned, most of these characters are not likely to really come back. You might see another Hulk, but really not going to see another Iron Man. You might see another Thor. You probably won't see too much of Miss Marvel. Probably won't see Black Widow. T'Challa, Black Panther is not coming back because the actor died. If this is supposed to be Black Arrow as a character, I'm not sure he ever even showed up in the movie. And yeah, no clue as to who that is, but I don't think she's in the movie either. I guess, if anything, right now would be a decent time to make a new Marvel game based on Marvel characters, because it's not likely we're going to see a big change as far as the second generation of Marvel characters. But those second generation Marvel characters are also a lot less interesting. Doctor Strange is your best bet, and then I don't know if I can really name too many other characters otherwise. Whoever replaced Black Panther would be one, and then maybe some Guardians of the Galaxy characters are still around. But yeah, they really only had enough interesting characters to do the Avengers and the first group of Avengers and in the Marvel universe, and now they're already in the second generation scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's a lot of characters certainly in the Marvel universe, but not that many that are recognizable or interesting. Apparently the Star Fox programmer says that he's sure the series will return. Dylan Cuthbert also explains why he feels the sequels don't capture the feeling of the original, which, for him to say that, he's basically saying even like StarCraft 64, which is where I think most people would have experienced Star Fox, doesn't capture the magic of Star Fox, aka Starwing, on the Super NES. There hasn't been a new Star Fox game in 7 years, with Star Fox Zero on the Wii U, which would make a lot of sense for you to make a Switch port of that. I'd be willing to play the game at that point. Apparently Star Fox Starwing was inspired by Starblade. Yeah, almost certainly you would think that this article came out because the artist from F-Zero was pushing for F-Zero to get a new game, and we saw F-Zero 99. In the same way, I could see Nintendo making a weirder Star Fox 99 type game. Same, almost exact same concept. 99 people flying around a simplistic space environment, shooting things and getting the highest score possible. Star Fox is an on-rail shooter with branching paths if you find the secrets. It's basically a light gun game without the light gun in that aspect, and that would work with the Switch fairly well, and there isn't a lot of competition in that field, so that would make sense. And there is even perhaps a weirdness you could embrace, and I don't think the Japanese of Nintendo Japan would get this trick or understand it or approve it, but you could really release Star Fox games to pander to the furries out there. Not in the sense of like Star Fox Adventure, in which you had the blue fox girl in tribal kind of lewd outfits, but just in general, having the Star Fox universe having anthropomorphic characters, anthropomorphic animal characters walking around talking, making them look maybe a little bit more muscly than they do individually and a little less animalistic than the way they do, might make it a niche furry style game that people who are furries would be willing to play, while people who are also not furries would still be willing to play. Certainly you can dip your toe into that as much as you can see that there's every now and then a Disney or Pixar movie with an anthropomorphic animal creature, or a bunch of anthropomorphic animal creatures, and the Beastars anime was a few years ago, and that had a pretty good reception too. So it really is better now than ever to bring back Star Fox. And I like the gameplay mechanic, and it's not like there's another space game that Nintendo has, and Starfield isn't coming to the Switch probably, so yeah, you would have almost thought that Nintendo should have tried to counter program and make a Star Fox game release right when Starfield released, and then parents would get confused and buy Star Fox instead of Starfield. Let's see. This is basically the same story for Video Games Chronicle. Nintendo has reportedly briefed Activision on its Switch 2 plans last year. They're still calling it the Switch 2, even though there's a decent chance it actually won't be called the Switch 2. I'm not 100% sure it's even going to be backward compatible. This is again from the Microsoft's legal battles with the US FTC, and we, I guess, are just into the actual weeds of having a legal battle here. I probably should find one of those YouTube lawyers who is covering the US FTC coverage, and then watch that every now and then just to stay up on it. Although, in all fairness, the mainstream video game journalists who are covering the coverage aren't getting that much out of it, and it probably doesn't have anything other than just the transcripts getting released at a delayed time. I don't know if there's a way somebody could sit in the room and view the court case. Like they may very well be in an arbitration state right now, instead of it being done in front of a judge. And if it was done in front of a judge, then in most cases some internet lawyer could sit in the audience and listen and take notes. Wouldn't be allowed to record or stream, but then the court itself might record and stream. And that's when these kinds of court cases might be slightly more interesting, although that is at a very low scale, because they still would be court cases and incredibly boring most of the time. Let's see, moving on. The second Scottish Game Awards will be opened by Scotland's First Minister. The judging panel has also been announced for this year's ceremony. Scotland's First Minister, in that they haven't had ministers before, or in that they have a really old guy who happened to be the First Minister. I'm not sure. Let's see. Platform in Glasgow on November 2nd is where it's taking place. And this is just one of those other cases where I just have to question how many Scottish games really exist. sometimes these national pride events really stop making sense because you're highlighting like incredibly small budget games, or you're highlighting the same 3 games over and over again. This one's going to consist of 15 categories. Let's see, all listed here, which none of these seem too weird, although there is some questions here as far as Spirit of Scotland might be a little too nebulous. Pure quality / creative impact is a little nebulous. You have a creative category here and a pure quality here. Best educational program, which is spelled with an M-E, I guess in Scotland, where it would just be Program. And then best educator, I would assume that's going to a person. Diversity champion is always a weird one too. Rising stars, kind of nebulous. And then lifetime achievement awards can be nebulous. The judging panel are a technical director from Bethesda, the news editor from PC Games In, I don't even know what MSP stands for, from Renfrewshire, Northwest. I bet this might be the mayor himself. And then a feature editor from Games Radar, then a games editor from The Guardian, and then a journalist columnist from The Herald, and then a staff writer from Video Games Chronicles, which he's obviously promoting himself there, and then the head of entrepreneurship from University of Dundee. So very little, like one video game company person being allowed to judge, and then it's just a lot of mainstream video game journalists from the UK also judging, and then one university person and maybe the mayor, which I imagine the mayor will just vote for the majority, or a minister. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if MSP stands for Minister of Scotland Parliament or something like that. Let's see. There's a video here at Video Games Chronicles showing Ada Wong in separate ways in action, if you want to check that out. Starfield being the 5th fastest selling game, we already talked about. That brings us to Gematsu, which again, we don't have that many articles, but who knows how long this will take. Most of the reason I guess we don't have that many articles is that even though I started late, there's still really not that much news that happens until somewhat late in the afternoon of Tuesday. Full remake of Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord is now available in early access for PC, which I think we had already put that on the follow list. You can see it's being received fairly well. It definitely looks pretty good for a modern take on a very, very old dungeon crawler game. But I almost certainly would assume that people are looking at this through rose-tinted glasses with nostalgia, and if you had no nostalgia, you really, really wouldn't want to play it. Which is exactly the problem I have, is I have no nostalgia for Wizardry. I may have owned Wizardry even, but I probably never played it. Even in the old days, when I first got into PC and gaming, I probably did have several floppy disks or CD-ROMs or even downloads of games that I didn't ever get around to playing, or demos of games I never got around to playing, very possibly demos. MechWarrior 5 Clans has been announced for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, due out in 2024, which it's going to be somewhat difficult to keep in my mind straight the difference between playing the Mech Warrior game 5 and Armored Core 6, since they're both mech games and there aren't that many mech games. Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising reveals Figure Studio and 9 minutes of Grand Bruise Legends gameplay. Which Grand Bruise Legends sounds like it's a parody mode of some sort. I guess check out this article if you're interested. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink adds a character called Gendagoza, which I assume is this guy. And then Deca Police concept image and playable guide trailers available. Never heard of this game Deca Police before though. Let's see if we can get a general idea of what this looks like if this wants to load. See, and I didn't change anything, I don't think. No, I actually think I did. I think I turned off use hardware acceleration in Firefox and then told it to use the default optimizations that it recommends, which I have no idea what that means. But it does seem like when I'm jumping around here, the audio is not cutting out and clipping. So there is something about using hardware optimization in Firefox that somehow messes the audio device up. I also think, I think I went into Windows and said none of the devices can take full exclusive control over the audio. And so maybe that fixed it also. There's too many settings in Windows, which is something crazy to say considering how I'm somewhat of a fan of Linux and having those too many settings. But even in Linux though, the settings are either so well hidden most of the time in Linux that you'd never change it, or you'd know exactly what you're doing when you're changing something and you wouldn't really expect performance to be amazing or change drastically either way. Whereas in Windows 10, and I assume Windows 11 is even worse at this, there's just 5 different ways you can change settings, and there's settings hidden in dialogues and driver boxes and pop-ups that really shouldn't be there. And at a certain level, yes, Windows 10 tried to hide most of those settings, but it sometimes is the case that you need to change them, and that shouldn't be the case. If you were to make a new Windows from scratch, you'd almost certainly get rid of a huge amount of driver settings and hardware settings and just have one default way in which things work, which, yeah, it never really works out that way, unfortunately. Moving on, Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, has the first trailer. Let's see what this looks like. And see, now I just clicked play and it did clip the audio out, I think. So it almost seems like it's almost random based on which video you're watching. Not sure. And see, Tokyo Game Show must not have started too much yet, because if Gamatsu would have had a lot more games to talk about by now. Yeah. The audio is now clipping again. So it was working perfectly in the previous option, and that means my settings I changed didn't affect anything. And yet it wasn't working on that page. Maybe it has more to do with a plugin. Maybe the blur plugin somehow is creating a weird situation. I don't know. I could almost see an argument of getting rid of the blur plugin anyways. Let's see. Inazuma 11 Victory Road adds a PlayStation 5 version and a third trailer. So again, this would be a YouTube video and you'd think it would just all work the same. And yet, again, the audio is clipping out for like half a second when I jump around. And I have no idea if you're actually hearing that or not. It may literally be only happening in my headphones. I should test that part too, because if it's just happening in my headphones, it doesn't matter. I can live with it. Two more articles from Video Games Chronicle. Gamatsu. We're already at Gamatsu. Atelier Risale Arena, Forgotten Alchemy, and the Polar Knight Liberator for iOS and Android launches September 23rd in Japan. And then Haunted House Revival launches October 12th. Which, yeah, I don't know if I've been doing a good enough job making sure that I can make YouTube shorts or not on these games. Haunted House, a very simplistic name. Roguelike or stealth game. Might be something of interest there. Let's go ahead and close that tab. That's going to bring us the GameDeveloper.com articles. Let's see. These are somewhat older stories too. Ubisoft Montreal is reportedly in disarray after forced return to office mandate. This was from the 15th. And then we talked about Bill Willingham saying he was never paid by Warner Brothers. This too from the 15th. Playtika has bought the mobile game developer InPlay Labs. Then Unity pledges to tweak the controversial runtime fee policy in the coming days. This was from the 18th, from today. And then the SAG-AFTRA strike authorization would provide maximum leverage against the companies, which is them promoting and pushing for their members to vote for a strike authorization. As I understand it still, it's important if you do go on strike to go on strike for work conditions on top of pay and not just pay alone, because there are definitely unfair laws out there that would benefit a company and allow a company to hire scabs easier if you are just striking for pay. Alright, and that's going to bring us to the stream follow list cleanup. And see, this banner actually looks pretty good, so I probably should just have all the banners with the same font size and the same color, just white on black. That would work fairly well, better than the other banners, so maybe I can tweak that later. So we've got some follow list cleanup here. We have one from 2021 called Kitty Adventure, which doesn't look anywhere good enough to get an exception, and it's irrelevant since it doesn't have 30 reviews. We're going through the K's. So then we have a 2023 game called Kitten Tales, which I'll give more time to, even though it's probably not going to do anything. And then we have Kitten Lost Her Box, which is, no, in a lot of ways I could probably just say no to this. Yeah. And then we have Kitten Burst. Suffice it to say, kitten fans do exist on Steam as far as game developers, and there are a lot of games with kitty in the name of it. Kitten Burst is from 2022 and not interesting looking. Then we move on to kiteboarding Pro from January, which I can give it a little bit more time, but it's not going to get much at this rate. If we are in the 9th month of 2023 and you've only gotten 14 reviews, you're not going to get another 16 in another 9 months. So as much as I might want to see a kiteboarding game, this isn't going to be it. And arguably, maybe that's something you would add to a skate-like game too. If you're going to add parkour, why not have kiteboarding? Maybe that's fairly different physics and movement programming you'd have to program. And arguably, you can only do so much kiteboarding before the entire game would focus on kiteboarding, or before it would get boring if it's not your main focus. In a lot of ways, I would imagine your first step is to have kiteboarding but on wheels. So I don't know if you call that parachute skating or what, and then program it so that the surface changes, so it's then kiteboarding on water, which really wouldn't probably change too much. Next we have a game called Kids Quest from January, which 3D platformer, 100% positive, 19 reviews. Again, probably could say no, but I'll give this more chance. By the time I come around the second time though, I'll almost certainly have to say no. Here we have a visual novel that doesn't look that interesting, although it is kind of nice to see a visual novel set in space. You don't see too much of that, and kind of different art style in the fashion and character designs, a little there, different art style in the spaceship designs, but you're not really seeing a lot of diversity in the backgrounds. Nice visual polish on the interface though, but standards are needing to be pretty high around visual novels anyway, so that's going to be a no. English Russian is also a red flag. Next we have a visual novel that does meet the requirements though, in that it has 250 reviews and it's very positive, from July of 2022. This is more of the kawaii, colorful anime style art style, which just really stands out compared to the previous game. It's not particularly from a recognizable developer or publisher, but whatever. So we'll put that on the wish list. Although, in all fairness, that doesn't mean I'd actually ever buy it. Increasingly, I don't know if I'm even going to buy another video game at all this year. Kings and Catapults is a year old with 1 user review, so it can go away. King Mini doesn't look like anything, so it can go away. I kind of wish there was a faster shortcut to click and unclick the follow button. I'm not sure how I would do that though. Like, I have a plugin that is letting me use the middle mouse button to close a page, but if I was to program, say, an extra button on my mouse, which I don't have an extra button or a movement on my mouse to click and unclick the follow, I don't know how I'd do that. Yeah, I'd have to think if there's maybe some way I can use OBS's plugin Advanced Scene Switcher to click on the screen somewhere. I could, if I can click on the screen, then clicking here and then closing the tab might be doable. But yeah, looking at this, Kingdom Under Fire, War of Heroes has the last game on the follow list to clean up today. It doesn't really strike me as something I want to play, so I'm going to say no to that. And that's going to bring me to all the new games on Steam. Alright. So we have Jeepney Simulator, which doesn't look like anything. I don't even know what a jeepney is. I would kind of think that it was a Jeep car, but if anything, it seems like it's some kind of stretch limo bus thing. Jeepney must be a Filipino word, since it's a Filipino-made driving game. I'm not sure how many people are in the Philippines to wonder enough as far as how many Filipino game programmers are out there. I'd imagine at best you have maybe 3 Filipino game developer companies in the Philippines. Of course, that could change at any time, certainly. Any country could have a major focus on game development and invest in a lot more companies, or some other country could, or company could invest in developers around the world. I imagine Filipinos get paid very little, relatively speaking, worldwide, so they might be a good source for cheap labor. Next we have, I commissioned some cats, which, yeah, still getting quite a lot of these I commissioned hidden object games. Then we have our first adult game. It's the college sex party game that we saw on the front page. It's already very popular. It's the 3D CGI characters, although in all fairness, I would say that these faces on these characters do feel like they have at least one extra level of polish to them. It definitely feels like this wasn't just a quick and dirty asset flip of a 3D CGI model. Yeah, standard 3D CGI art style with the natural skin tones and color palette, not cartoony looking. Decent amount of diversity in the backgrounds, and yeah, nothing particularly extreme as far as fetish as on any of the screenshots. The game is selling for $6.19. It says it's English full audio and supports 30 other languages. Now weirdly, it's also advertising a game called Exorcist Simulator, which I don't think is an adult game. It's also bundled with the adult game Stepsister. Looks like there might be some jigsaw puzzle gameplay mechanics here. As far as a mini games, it says it has mini games, and that's about it. How much was it selling for? $6.19. Not terrible. It's also rated very positively, 85% positive with 95 user reviews. So that would certainly explain why it's at the top of the charts right now. They're saying it's part of the Taboo Tales franchise, which is the publisher and developer. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's too much taboo actually in the game, though. Felt very vanilla. Next game I can show you is just called Inmate Survival, which looks like nothing. Yeah, we may be at the beginning of the end of days as far as seeing those kinds of asset flip garbage games coming out on Steam. Particularly if Valve just single-handedly said, hey, we're not paying for an install-based fee of Unity-based games. We would rather you're going to either sign a contract to pay that yourself, or we're going to completely forbid Unity-based games on Valve, which that would be too extreme to do that, but who knows, it might happen. This is a weird looking visual novel in that the art style feels a little cartoony, comic booky, pencils like hand drawn, but it doesn't inherently seem terrible visually either. So I guess I could say the game is free, so let's put it on the follow list and leave it to make a YouTube short on it, and then just move on. Frontiera, it doesn't look quite polished enough. Absolute Doppelkopf for Windows 11 looks like it might be a fairly nicely animated card game. English and German full audio. Of course, I guess you'd have to know what Doppelkopf is. Let's see. Extended set of rules with extensive compilation of different variants. I have been trying to keep a general idea on what YouTube shorts are getting views and which ones aren't, and weirdly, the visual novels with the bright colorful anime characters don't seem like they get that many views. I also heard from another YouTuber saying that if you show legs or arms or muscles or just too much skin of a female character, you get effectively shadow banned and on YouTube shorts, and that it's looking at almost every single frame, or if not every single frame of a YouTube short, which would be easy enough to do since they're only a minute long at most. So does that really change my strategy or the way I'm going to make YouTube shorts? No, but I would have thought that the bright, colorful, cartoony ones might get clicked on more, although it kind of makes sense that they don't too, because when you compare it to every other YouTube short, they're almost all around showing more natural color palette depictions of people or things. Let's see. Apparently there's a couple of card games here, but these German card games are going to be weird, and certainly you're going to be paying a premium for it. This might be a trend that we see a little bit, where all of a sudden you see games that are saying they're for Windows 11 specifically, but probably not, because it's been decades since somebody has actually tried to succeed in selling their game by saying this is for Windows 10 or Windows 11. It's by default assumed that if you can buy a game on Steam, it's going to run on the most modern version of Windows, and it's pretty much assumed that it will run on older versions of Windows too. Noticeably here, the recommended windows go back all the way to XP and Windows 7 and 8 and 10 and 11, and Steam itself I don't think even really runs its own client on XP. Maybe XP Service Pack 3 still runs, but I think we might be closer to Windows 7 or even Windows 8 being no longer supported for the Steam client. Here we have a polygonal backrooms asset flip game. Although it's important to point out too that even if Unity did start to try and charge per installs, there really would be a lot of scammers that would just steal Unity and crack it so that didn't happen for their games they develop, or they would give fake information so they wouldn't pay anyways. The scammers are going to scam even more. They're not going to scam less. So because of that, unless Unity really figured a way to crack down on all of that, you almost certainly would see no change in these low effort Unity, I assume Unity based games. Yep. Although maybe there is room for Unity to crack down on low effort game developers, asset flippers who potentially are not even paying Unity for the engine when they should. Is this game YouTube family friendly? It says it's E for everyone, but it's questionable. Here we have an asset flip of the Go Up or Only Up game, I think is what it was originally called. I think that game has now been taken down, and that game itself was accused of stealing Unity or Unreal assets from some store. Girl up here is just a bikini, big-breasted lady platforming and jumping in a bikini, and you're just seeing a whole bunch of other nonsense in the screenshots. He does I don't really want to applaud an asset flipper, but he does hit upon something that makes a decent amount of sense. If you can get that jiggle physics going, and when you're jumping you're getting some boob bounce, although very often you'd be looking at the butt, but if you could get the butt physics going and some butt jiggle as you're jumping, that would be a lot more appealing to watch as far as gameplay than just watching an average 3D model guy jumping. So yeah, I guess you could go with that, although it would be still very repetitive, and I don't know how you fix that. I guess if you were going to make a only up game, you probably would almost want to have some ragdoll physics in it when you fall, and some damage appearance when you fall. Clothes get a little torn, you get a little cut and bruised. That could be a way of more personalizing the character as they're jumping. You can have dialogue playing, like Getting Over It with Benet Foddy, and a narrator talking, but you could also just have the characters reacting and talking, grunting when they're jumping. You could have specific checkpoints where you get to levels, and when you get to certain levels there's a different kind of gameplay mechanic, or they take a break. There definitely is a way to flesh out the idea of just jumping up all the way if you wanted to put some polish into it, although I'm not sure if you can put enough polish into it before you start to just make platforms that you're jumping to with enemies that you would then fight to get back to a much more normal mechanic in most video games, which is fighting, shooting, or punching, kicking, sword fighting enemies. Let's see. Moving on, we have a game called Army Troop, which looks visually polished enough to put on the fall list and make a short on, so I'll do that. Then we have a game called Wheelchair Tester, which looks like nothing of interest. Then we have a game called Carnage Offering Tower Defense, which is somehow already on the fall list, which is interesting. I'll guess I just leave this on the fall list until I do a fall list cleanup. I almost certainly would take it off the fall list. I guess maybe that game was in early access. Here we have a game called Firecrackers, which seems like you're blowing up 3D things with firecrackers in VR. Not the worst idea, certainly. It's just pyromancy, not pyromancy, pyromaniacs in a controlled, safe environment, burning things down and blowing things up. I wonder if you made a non-VR version of this, though, if it wouldn't be more accessible. It almost certainly would be more accessible, but more appealing too, There really isn't a lot of games where you can run around and just burn things down. There's some missions in Far Cry where you burn down like marijuana fields. Or at least one mission like that. But imagine a world like Skyrim where you could just burn down an entire forest in Skyrim. That would have been interesting. If anything, that also highlights where Starfield is trying to conveniently skip over a lot of functions and features that you would kind of expect to exist. Let's see. Moving on, we have a game called Stone Man's Adventure. Yeah, I don't think there's quite enough here for a Sokoban block pushing game. Haven't talked about a Sokoban game in a while. Haven't seen one. Stick Spinner looks like nothing. Here we have a game called Tornado, which looks like nothing. Here we have a game called Cozy Fishing, which I think the isometric visuals here probably don't benefit fishing that much, and it really makes it just feel like it's a single colored screen Unity, single background Unity game. Yeah, just don't feel like there's quite enough here. Next we have a game called Bunker Defense, which I guess I'll give it a chance. Then we have a game called Lights of Life, which looks like a zombie game, which I probably shouldn't give a chance to, but I will. Yep. I'm gonna have to hurry here because I'm gonna have to run to the bathroom. Here we have something called Save the World, which looks like nothing. Omega Tower we could say no to immediately just by the logo. Avoid the Police we can say no to, has an infinite runner. Nature Park Lily Belt VR. Not quite enough here in the screenshots to say yes to that. Here we have something called Dungeon Dreams 2, which apparently has people in swimsuits kissing and sleeping with a character, steal and rob and attack people. This again feels like this might be one of those RPG Maker games that's been censored, although the screenshots don't really scream that. I could see maybe this piece being added there. I could see this piece being added here, and then so you just see more cleavage in that screenshot. It's possible that this character could have been originally topless, but no confirmation there. As for what the actual game is, it looks like a JRPG game, and honestly it barely even feels like an RPG Maker game, because they're doing a very good job of just hiding everything behind the conversation screens. Like putting this character right in front so you can't really see the RPG Maker element, but that's not gonna fool me, so don't really feel like I need to do anything here. I guess I'm being fairly cruel on RPG Maker looking games, even if they're not actually made with RPG Maker, which means I'm probably being fairly cruel against JRPG games in general. But I do definitely want to highlight the good JRPG games, and not just like colorful 3D RPG games like Dragon Quest JRPG games, but things that are 8-bit style, fantasy themed, tend to be a no-go zone for what I want to promote and talk about. This game is just a prologue. Looks like it's a building simulator game. Fantasy monster clicker we can ignore. Here we have one that looks like it's probably a Japanese only game. Nope, Chinese only game. It says it supports English, but I heavily suspect it doesn't. Seems like you're running around finding other cats. Next we have Shipping Manager, which doesn't look like anything. Then we have Journey to Alien Worlds, which doesn't look like anything. Then we have Polyfury. Then we have Ortharion, The Last Battle, which I'll give that a chance. Next we have another adult game, another 3D CGI game called Shadows of the Past, which is a much more subtle name. 3D CGI girl and guy, looks like they might even be private detective and secretary. Seems like it's mostly taking place in their office between those two characters. The adult game is selling for $4.24. It's English, Chinese, and Russian, which that's somewhat red flags. And yeah, it doesn't feel like the adult content is anything other than just very vanilla stuff. Although the outfits the characters are wearing are slightly different when they are wearing outfits, and that's pretty much what I'd say. You'd almost expect this to be black and white since it's a detective story. It's important to point out too that we're still keeping an eye here to see if the 2D colorful anime style adult games are going to get changed because of Tokyo Game Show. We didn't see a lot of them last week, so on one hand we might see the average amount this week, or on the other hand we may see a very few or none, or we may see a lot more because of the Tokyo Game Show, and we never really get a good indication of what Valve is doing, and Valve is fairly inconsistent anyways. But we're looking to see if the games get bundled and released in one big group back to back or not. This game, Tower Pandemonium, is not good enough. Yeah, Castle Void doesn't look like anything. Here we have a RPG Maker game called Case 03 True Cannibal Boy, which K00, the Cannibal Boy, let's see, was released in 2020, so let's click on that and see what happened here. Had 100 reviews, it's 79% positive. So do I want to then push forward and potentially put on the fall list a RPG Maker game that has 2 prequels around a cannibal boy, whatever a cannibal boy is? I assume it's a boy who is a cannibal. No, I don't think so. I don't think this interests me quite enough to even bother to put it on the fall list. And as far as making a YouTube short on it, I'm also going to say no, because probably just wouldn't get any views, and we have so many YouTube shorts already. It's probably a terrible reason to say no, though. You can see Liza P, as far as a thrilling Souls-like game, is 90% positive. So yeah, in that case I can just go ahead and put that on the wish list. Although again, in fairness, and having not really played any of the Souls games to completion, I tried some of the Dark Souls game and didn't make it. I don't know if I really would ever try to play Liza P. And we have a game called Calax, which I'll give that a chance since I can't really tell what it is. And then we've got Dungeon Golf, which that might be an interesting twist there. And then we have Car Mechanic City Driving, which looks like nothing. And then we have a game called Underlevel, which is probably trying to be a parody on Undertale or create name confusion, but I'm not certain on that, so I'm going to give it a chance. We're almost done. Eldritch Exterminators. Doesn't look like anything. Humanity Z. Give that a chance. So again, yeah, no 2D adult game today. We'll see what happens on Wednesday. This Meet Veterans doesn't look good enough. Here we have something called How to Hack In, which looks like it might be a hacking mini game. So I'll give that a chance. Not a lot of games even getting YouTube Shorts today. And then Time Survivors Chapter 0. I'm gonna say no to. So that's gonna be it for the stream. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.